Hello YouTube friends, Dr. Teresa Ulrich here with you again. Thank you so much for joining me for my 12-part series comparing dwarf seahorses with larger seahorses. If you've missed the previous videos in this series, I've linked them below this video for your convenience. Today we're going to be talking about Part 7, Raising Young. Talking about seahorse babies or seahorse fry is one of my most favorite things, so this is going to be an enjoyable video for me. Let's start with the larger seahorses. In general, trying to raise larger seahorses can be a little less predictable in the sense that you really can't count on putting a male and female together in one aquarium and having them flirt and mate. So it is unpredictable. Having two of each gender together is not a guarantee of a pregnancy. Sometimes you can play around with water conditions or supplements or additives to encourage mating, but again, nature takes its course on this one. In case you didn't know, it is the father who is the one who becomes pregnant. It's the only animal in the world where the father is pregnant. There are scientific ways of realizing that this is true, that it is the male who becomes pregnant. I'm not going to get into that today, but I just thought it was a fun fact. When larger seahorses produce broods of fry, they usually produce several hundred at a time. I've seen anywhere from a couple hundred to several hundred, and I've heard reports of over 1,000. These little fry are very tiny. They look very much like their parents, except they have very large heads and small bodies and tails. They tend to be more difficult to raise. One of the reasons for that is that in nature, they don't really have a high survival percentage rate. So that rate is even lower in captivity, where conditions aren't what they would normally expect for raising fry. A lot of the larger seahorses produce fry that are pelagic versus benthic. That means when they're born, they tend to like to float at the top of the water surface, searching for their food, versus hanging down towards the bottom of an aquarium, grabbing with their tails. Some species will grab with their tails at night, and then when lights come back on, they'll float again until they reach a certain age. This makes it a little bit harder to feed them because they do require newly hatched brine shrimp and copepods, and that means you have to have sufficient food at the surface of the water for them. Also, because their eating requirements are so different than their parents, they definitely have to be raised in a separate aquarium, something much smaller where food can be concentrated. Larger seahorse young are also more difficult to raise just because they're prone to microorganisms that will attack them and may require some intervention to help them survive those strategies, those irritants that they experience, and prevent them from being successfully raised. Dwarf seahorses, on the other hand, you're going to find a completely different experience with raising them. For one thing, they're highly prolific when water conditions are kept well. In fact, they're so social, just getting a group of them together, you're bound to see lots of flirting and then pregnant papas. It seems as though it's contagious. Once one papa becomes pregnant, something in the water, literally could be hormones, seems to impact the other males, and you'll start noticing more of them becoming pregnant. Another thing that makes dwarf seahorses quite a bit different from the larger seahorses regarding their fry is that they give birth to much smaller broods. Even though the dwarf seahorse is one of the smallest seahorses in the world, it produces one of the largest fry in the world. And because the fry are so big, the dwarfs give birth to only about a dozen or so at a time. Now, I've had dwarf seahorses in the past that gave birth to only 1 or 2 babies at a time. I've had them give birth to up to 13 or 15, and I've heard reports of some producing up to 21 in a brood, but that's pretty unusual. I want to say that 10 to 12 is about the norm. In general, dwarf fry are easier to raise. They're very well formed and look identical to their parents except extra tiny. They already can grab with their tails. They don't hug at the surface of the water or at the bottom of the water. They just grab onto any hitching posts just as their parents would. So they really are a nice little miniature, ready-to-go version of seahorse, ready to be raised. One of the things that makes them easier is that they eat the exact same foods that their parents do, newly hatched brine shrimp. So if you wanted to, you could try to raise the dwarf fry in the same aquarium as their parents, depending on how large the aquarium is. Some people like to separate the fry and put them in smaller aquariums so that they can concentrate the food a little bit better and ensure their success of raising the fry. But I've known of people who have raised dwarf seahorses through several generations, and that's a testament to the ease of raising the fry compared to raising the larger seahorses. I have known people to raise larger seahorses, and I've actually raised some larger seahorse fry to maturity. But again, only one or two survived from an entire brood. And the most successful people seem to be the high volume facilities that we tend to buy our captive bred seahorses from. And just another thought, when you are raising large seahorses, you are going to have to wean them onto the frozen shrimp food that is the same as the parents if you want to be able to eventually add them to the same aquarium as their parents. So overall, I would say that dwarf seahorse keepers are going to find a lot more success with seahorses breeding and raising their young. I hope you enjoyed this series so far. If you're finding these videos helpful, please hit the like button. If you would like to find out when part 8 is released, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for Cowfish Pro. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here with me today, and I really hope you'll continue with me in the series.